Every summer, on a tiny ring of sand and coral near the top of the Great Barrier Reef, the largest gathering of sea turtles anywhere on Earth hauls itself out of the ocean to make the next generation. And every summer, by the thousand, the mothers were dying before they could crawl back to the water. Not to sharks, not to hunters. They were being killed by the beach itself. For years, scientists stood on that sand and counted the bodies. Grown females, the weight of a refrigerator, lying motionless in the rising heat, and they could not stop it. Then a small team tried something that sounds almost too simple to matter against a problem that size. They built a fence. And what they came back to find, one nesting season later, was so different from what they had left behind that it was hard to believe they were standing on the same island. This is what happened. The island is a freckle on the map, a low coral cay of only about 27 hectares, smaller than many city parks, sitting more than 600 kilometers north of the nearest city on the far rim of the reef. It is so remote and so fragile that ordinary people are not allowed to set foot on it. And for a few weeks every year, this scrap of sand becomes the single most important turtle nursery on the planet. The animal that comes to it is one of the oldest designs in the ocean. The green turtle was already swimming these waters when dinosaurs walked the land, and it has barely changed since. It can live for the better part of a century, which means a female laying her eggs on that beach tonight may have been hatching there before the first scientists ever set foot on the place. A grown female stretches more than a meter across the shell and can weigh around 180 kilograms. And she spends almost her whole life far out at sea, drifting over distant seagrass meadows she may have grazed for decades. But when the time comes to lay her eggs, she does something that still stuns the people who study her. She crosses open ocean sometimes for thousands of kilometers and returns to the exact beach where she herself clawed out of the sand as a hatchling a lifetime before. Some of the mothers nesting on this island first hatched there more than 30 years earlier. How she pinpoints it across all that emptiness, with no chart and no landmarks, is something researchers are still working to fully explain. The best evidence is that she reads the faint magnetic signature of the coast, the way we read a familiar street, a sense burned into her on the single night she first crawled down into the surf. And the scale of the gathering is almost impossible to picture until you see it from the air. In a strong year, more than 60,000 green turtles come to this one tiny island to nest. On a single peak night, as many as 20,000 of them can be inching up the same narrow beach at once, shell against shell, until the sand seems to move. Think about what that means for a species. Around 90% of all the green turtles in the northern Great Barrier Reef come from this one fragile cay. If it fails, almost the entire population fails with it. And by the time anyone fully understood that, the island had already been failing for a long time. Researchers had been visiting since the 1972, tagging the females, counting the nests, learning the rhythm of the seasons. Then, in the mid-1990s, the numbers stopped making sense. Tens of thousands of mothers were still dragging themselves ashore every year, but fewer and fewer hatchlings were ever crawling back out of the sand. One researcher who first came to the island in awe of the turtles later described the heartbreak of walking that same beach and finding it littered with countless freshly laid eggs that had already died, flooded out before they ever had a chance. When the team dug into the failed nests to find out why, the answer was grim. The eggs were drowning. Over many years, the low nesting beach had slowly sunk relative to the sea around it, just enough that at high tide salt water now crept up through the sand and into the egg chambers below. And a sea turtle egg is not built to be flooded. The tiny turtle developing inside needs to breathe through the shell, and when a nest sits underwater for too long, the embryos suffocate before they ever take shape. Every high tide was quietly erasing part of the next generation, and the few that did hatch faced a gauntlet of their own. A newly emerged turtle is no bigger than the palm of your hand, and from the moment it digs free, it has to sprint for the water past crabs and gulls and 100 other open mouths, and then survive years adrift in the deep ocean before it is ever large enough to be safe. Only a tiny fraction of hatchlings will ever live to nest, which is exactly why every egg on that beach mattered so much, and why a drowned nest was not a small loss. It was a hole punched in the future of the entire population. But the drowning eggs were only half of the disaster. The other half was happening to the mothers themselves. Picture a 180-kilogram animal built for weightless gliding through open water, and almost helpless the moment she leaves it. She comes ashore, in the dark, in the crush of thousands of other turtles, and she crawls inland, searching for somewhere to dig. And there, in the middle of the island, she runs into low ledges of old rock, only a meter or two high. To us, that is nothing. To a creature shaped like a tank, it is a cliff. She tries to climb, she loses her balance, and she topples over the edge and lands upside down on her shell. A turtle flipped onto its back, on dry land, cannot turn itself over. Her flippers paddle uselessly at the air, and as the tropical sun climbs and the temperature rises, she slowly cooks where she lies. Others wedged themselves into the rocks and could not pull free. Others simply ran out of strength on the open sand and overheated before they could reach the cool of the sea. In the worst seasons, thousands of adult females were dying on this one small island every year. And remember what these animals were: not eggs, not hatchlings, grown breeding females. The rarest and most precious individuals in an endangered population, the ones who had already survived 30 years in the open ocean just to arrive, dying within a few meters of where they were born, killed by the shape of the ground itself. If watching a place fight its way back from the brink is why you are here, take a second to subscribe, because this is where the story turns. So, in 2014, a group of people decided to do something almost no one had ever attempted. They decided to redesign an island. It was not the work of one agency, but a true partnership. The Queensland government, a major mining company, the Reef's Marine Park Authority, a conservation foundation, and at the heart of it, the Wathathi and Miriam Nation traditional owners, the people who have cared for this place across 60,000 years of unbroken knowledge. Their plan was careful and humble. Try a fix at small scale, measure exactly what it does, and only build it bigger if the numbers say so. And the very first idea they tested was the strangest one of all. To stop the falls, they would put a barrier between the turtles and the ledges. It sounds almost absurd, a fence to save an ancient ocean reptile. More than a few people doubted it could possibly work. You cannot, after all, hurt a wild sea turtle. But the logic was precise. The turtles were not falling because the ledges were impossible to avoid. They were falling because nothing stood between them and the drop in the dark. A low barrier in the right place could gently turn a wandering female aside and send her back towards safe, open sand before she ever reached the edge. So they ran the trial, fenced a stretch of the worst cliffs, and then did the only thing that matters in this kind of work. They counted, and where that fence stood, the dying at the cliffs all but stopped. The strange idea worked. That single result changed everything that followed. Over the next several years, the team scaled it up around the island, replacing the first rough barriers with custom turtle-proof fencing built for the job, until roughly 1,750 meters of it ringed the cliffs, gently steering thousands of mothers away from the edges every season. And this is the part that matters most. The traditional owners did not stand at the edge of this work. Wathathi and Miriam Nation rangers led it on their own sea country, guiding the installation with knowledge of this island that no outside scientist could match. But a fence could only stop the falling. It could do nothing about the drowning. So the team turned to the second, far harder problem: they were going to lift the beach. Just getting the means to do it there was its own ordeal. Barging heavy machinery across hundreds of kilometers of open sea to a protected island where every move had to be watched so that the rescue itself did no harm. They brought heavy machinery to one of the most isolated coral cays in the world and moved around 40,000 cubic meters of sand, enough to bury a football field many meters deep, reshaping about 35,000 square meters of nesting beach and raising it back above the reach of the tides. The change was immediate and measurable. On the rebuilt sections, the females were now laying their eggs above the floodline, in sand that stayed dry through the high tide. They spread out instead of crowding into the same doomed strip, which meant fewer of them dug up nests that had already been laid. And the raised beach held. 5 years on, researchers confirmed the rebuilt sections were still stable, still dry, still working. Yet for all the engineering, the team never stopped doing the simplest thing of all. Every single morning while they were on the island, a crew set out on what they came to call the rescue walk. They moved along the beaches at first light, and one by one, they flipped overturned females back onto their feet, pried trapped turtles out of the rocks, and hauled the exhausted ones, all 180 kilograms of them, back down to the water before the heat could take them. It is slow, sweating, unglamorous work, and it has saved hundreds of breeding females that would otherwise have died on their backs in the sun. And to know whether any of it was truly working, the team needed to do one more thing well. They needed to count the turtles accurately, and that turned out to be its own quiet breakthrough. For years, the counts had been done by hand. Researchers would paint a harmless stripe on the shells of around 2,000 nesting females, then the next day try to count from a boat how many turtles in the water carried a stripe and how many did not, and use the ratio to estimate the whole crowd. But the human eye is drawn straight to the bright mark. The painted turtles were easy to spot, the unpainted ones slipped past, and the final numbers came out biased and low. Then, the team sent up a drone and replayed the footage, frame by frame from the air. Every turtle was just a shape on the water, painted or not, and the bias vanished. The corrected count was staggering. Around 64,000 green turtles circling a single island the size of a few city blocks, and the realization that every earlier survey had badly undercounted this population for decades. Accurate numbers turned hope into proof, and the proof was overwhelming. At the cliffs, the share of turtle deaths caused by falls dropped to a small fraction of what it had been. The difference between losing a third of the island's mothers to a stupid preventable accident and saving almost all of them. On the beaches, lifting the sand above the tides doubled the amount of nesting habitat that actually worked, and the hatching rate, which had collapsed since the 1,990 seconds, roughly doubled again. And the single number that holds all of it together is this. Because of the project, more than 640,000 additional green turtle hatchlings have already scrambled down that beach and vanished into the sea hatchlings that under the old conditions would simply never have existed. And that number is not finished. Because of how green turtles live, the gains compound across decades. Every breeding female saved by a fence will come back to nest again and again for the rest of her long life. Every clutch laid on dry raised sand now has a real chance to hatch. Researchers project that over the coming decade, millions more hatchlings will pour off this island, the slow interest paid on the lives saved today. There was an unexpected gift in the work as well. The same fences that kept the turtles off the cliffs also kept them out of the island's crowded interior, where vast colonies of seabirds nest on the open ground. For years, wandering turtles had been trampling those nests and scattering the chicks. With the barriers in place, the birds quietly got their ground back too. This cay is not only the greatest green turtle nursery of its kind, it is also one of the most important seabird colonies on the entire reef, and for years the two had been colliding in the dark. Now, with the turtles gently steered toward the open sand where they belonged, the seabirds could raise their chicks in peace. One project, meant to save a single species, had begun healing more than one, and every so often, the island offers a small reminder of how long these animals have been keeping this appointment. On a recent visit, researchers recognized a female from a worn tag and realized she had first been marked 30 years earlier at a feeding ground far away and never recorded since. After 3 decades alone in the open ocean, she had come home to the same sand to do the one thing her kind has done since the age of the dinosaurs. Only now, the tide that meets her no longer drags her young under. So here is what this island actually teaches us, and it is worth holding on to. The turtles were not dying because the world had run out of room for them, or because some force too vast to fight had decided their time was over. They were dying from something fixable, a beach that had sunk a little too low, a ledge that was a little too steep in the dark. And the people who loved this place did not look away and call it nature taking its course. They studied the problem until they understood it exactly. They tested a humble idea at the smallest possible scale. They measured the result honestly, and when the dying stopped, they had the wisdom to build on what worked, joining the newest science to 60,000 years of knowledge held by the people who have always cared for this island. It is easy to believe that saving a species must take something vast and impossible. This island says otherwise. Sometimes it takes patience, honest measurement, the right partnership, and a fence in the right place. Somewhere off the coast of Australia tonight, the tide is rising over that beach, and for the first time in a long time, it is no longer pulling the next generation under. On sand that was nearly lost, hundreds of thousands of small turtles have already crawled down to the water and disappeared into the dark, exactly as they were always meant to. If stories like this one are why you are here, this is what this channel is for. Follow along, and we will keep bringing you the places where the natural world is quietly winning.